So anyways, yeah, as part of my AASHTO technical committee, part of my responsibility is to improve and to upgrade and respond to different states that have questions in regards to concerns they have with the MBE or the MBEI. And so there was quite a few states had submitted suggested changes to the MBEI, but about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, Matt Farr, who was the former chair, and then Glenn Washer, we prepared a process for evaluating the benefits of adding elements to the MBEI, right? And so as you add elements, there's a delicate balance of being too onerous to states and putting too much responsibility on states, but also giving them guidance on best practices and best ways of doing elements and providing those elements. And so as part of that process of adding new elements, we came up with this flow chart that describes kind of, oops, sorry, let me get back to this page. This is the process, and now it has T18 in here, but would now just say the Safety and Evaluation Committee. But basically the process is that there's a flow chart here that we follow, is that rather than just adding the elements kind of through the normal balloting process, which would get feedback from states, was be actually sending out a survey before it goes out to ballot. And so it'd be another year ahead of time. And so so there was a research project that Michigan Tech championed based on some of these big bridge owner requests. So like the New York Tollway and the Maryland, New York City DOT, and all these big bridge owners that own these cable stays and suspension bridges and tied arches and some of these, very complex bridges. And so their concern is that it's very difficult to report their elements or their elements that they create maybe in an ADE and then roll that up into another element. So for instance, like a stay area or stay building or a stay wall, to roll those up to a pier wall. So they're trying to fudge these elements for these really complex bridges and roll them up like saddles and those other things that are really complex, and rolling those up into existing NBE elements. And so there's really not a good way of doing that. And so states are having a hard time quantifying and coding and getting right condition states for elements that were really difficult to kind of use the existing elements to really help them describe the condition of the bridge. And so they put together this research project, and the research project, like as I said, was, and I can give you a link to the research project, you could probably Google it. But it basically suggested adding, about 18 elements, I think it was, to the existing MBEI. And so, the original committee of T18 just says, no, we don't want to do anything. We don't want anything because we don't have a process. And so what I'm sharing you on the screen is this process, and the process has the committee or T18 or Safety Evaluation Committee send out a pre-ballot survey to see if there's interest in adding those elements. And so we did send out a survey, and hopefully you should have responded to that survey. And I can pull up the answers. And so I guess the general response would be, let's see here, I'm a little convoluted here, but I'm having trouble locating the exact responses. But generally speaking, the vast majority of the states approved of these new elements. And so the committee went ahead and created a new ballot item. And so that's going to be balloted this summer in Kansas City, and I'll try to open it. And hopefully you had the chance. Actually, you have the chance to review them as we speak, because it's right now. This ballot item is open for getting. Oops, let me pull my thing aside here. This ballot item is out for review right now. Pulling my things over to the screen here, and so. And so we created 2 ballot items. We have 8 ballot items from my committee for this year, and this is the 7th and 8th ballot item, the only 2 that for the MBEI, basically. And so we're adding these new elements for these bigger bridges. And let's see if I can And again, this was at the request of these big bridge owners because they actually want the benefit of having these elements added to the MBEI. And so we added, like, so here's a good example here. Apologize if this is not presenting this in a very good way, but anyways. So like a good example of one of the elements that we're adding is steel primary cable saddle. So that's an element that was never really described before. So you would have had to kind of code that in the cable element or some other element to kind of make up for that condition or describe that condition. But there's enough bridges that have this element, and we're going to add, they're proposing on adding this element 164 to the MBEI. And so this research project came up with the elements and also came up with the condition states based on feedback from all of the states that were part of this research study. And I guess there may be like 12 or 15 agencies that were owners of these bigger bridges that actually were part of this research panel. And so steel cable acreage, a socket or assembly was another element that we added. So anything that's underlined is something that we added. And so, I mean, obviously gusset plates was there already. We just deleted it from here and then added it down here to keep it in alphabetical or numerical order. Some other elements that we added was a concrete anchorage chamber walls, steel anchor chamber walls, masonry anchor chamber walls, concrete block anchors. Sorry, I'm getting tons of emails here. So anyways, I don't want to go through this entire document to go through all of the elements and all the condition states that we added. Again, this came out of the research study, but again, you should have this agenda item and you should be able to review this and provide comment to us on what you think of this. And so another one that's added is cable protective system. So that's another element that they added. Here are some elements that were added, kind of a miscellaneous, we call them miscellaneous bridge elements. They're not necessarily big bridge elements only, but they are part of other bridge elements that would be added. And so these would be added as BMEs or bridge maintenance elements. And so vibration damper, deck drainage, a very timely element, substructure impact protection. It's not necessarily just for ship impact, it's also for train as well as car impacts. And then splay castings and external post-tensioning assembly. So if you have a post-tensioning assembly that's not buried in concrete that you can actually visually inspect. And so in this agenda item, we go through, let's see if I can get to all of this. This is many pages, 35 pages here. And like I said, I don't want to go through them. Yeah, Nancy's, we're meeting in Cobb's. Let's see here in the summer. So so some elements we added as what's called NBEs. I'm assuming you're all familiar with that. And some of them we added as BMEs. And the ones that are, and I'll get into this a little bit later, the ones that are NBEs are required to be submitted to Federal Highway, and some of the BMEs are required to be submitted to Federal Highway as part of the TAPE annual submittal. And so, but all of the NBEs, so all of this, all of these new additional elements here would be have to be added and submitted with your data. We have talked to Federal Highway. Federal Highway is okay with us adding any NBE or BME elements, and then they just ask that to let them know which ones would be reportable. And so they will be able to accept these new NBEs as soon as states actually collect the data to get that in there. We have outreach to BRM and to SIMS or AASHTO or AssetWise, and they are comfortable with these new added elements. So they're aware of them, and they are planning on coding them into their new updates and their new software systems, so that people can actually put the data in for these new elements. So we have been reaching out to them as well. And then the rest of this agenda item has changes to some of the language. Some of the other slight changes that we've made is just to highlight a little bit general, is a big one here is this efflorescence or rust staining. So let's say you have a concrete deck and you have some efflorescence. And so here is the previous language, and we made the change saying that if you have efflorescence, that if you have rust staining or don't have rust staining, that would be condition state 2. But if you are having rustating, meaning you have some section loss and you have lots of efflorescence, and a lot of people had questions on what heavy buildup means, like what is a heavy buildup and what is, you know, some moderate or light buildup of efflorescence and what that means. And so again, we kind of clarified that there too about the rust staining being the differentiator between condition state 2 and 3. We also added defects. So there was a distortion and this seems, I'm trying to think, I think distortion was a steel defect that we added. So as we're adding some of these newer elements, it made sense to add defects that actually describe some of the conditions of these newer elements that we're adding. So we actually added the distortion defects. That's a 1900 new element. Let's see here. I can go into detail. And so here's some more of those ones that I talked about earlier about being added. I'm open this. I meant this having more of a conversation as opposed to me presenting. So I apologize if I'm a little not pulled together here as much as maybe I wanted to. So just coming into this a little bit. Misalignment and wear are another defects that we're adding. Again, defects are something that is not required. For instance, MnDOT does not, or any Minnesota bridge does not collect any defect information or defect language or quantities in any defect. We collect notes in the condition states for every bridge, but we don't codify or quantify the exact defect using the standard defect language. So defects aren't required. And so we changed some of the language here about, like I said, I added misalignment and wear for that one. Let's see here, it's the efflorescence, that's defects in masonry. Let's see here. This is defects. I'm trying to think. For the vibration damper, so this is a new element, and so we had to kind of describe what a condition state 1 through 4 would be, and all the necessary defects that could be applicable to this new element. So we had to go through all these new elements and figure out which defects would apply to that specific element or not. So that's part of this. So a deck drainage system. And so again, BMEs, as you're well aware, states have vast authority or responsibility to make changes or can make changes to the condition state language and criteria. So you can go in and use this language, or you can change it to your whatever else you want. So MnDOT has had a deck drainage system, ADE, for many years, and so we're probably keeping that element. But if you wanted to, you could use this BME element and these standard condition state languages if this is an element that you wanted to gather information on. But these are the defects that would be associated with that deck drainage system. So it's up to the state to decide exactly how you want to categorize this and how you want to kind of quantify. Is it just like a downspout, or is it actually a drainage catchment system, or is it, what would be the criteria for when you would apply this element or not, and giving direction for that element. Here is a substructure impact protection, very timely for today, I guess, regarding the incident in Baltimore, which is obviously a very sad situation. Let's see here. So this is the primary cable bands and splay castings element in the condition state language. So again, these are all things. If you want to read a little bit about the background, about after all the ballot items or on every ballot items, one of the things that they do at the very end is describe like how it came about, or what was the impetus for this, or what's the background and what's the impact. And so if you read some of this, that describes the defects, kind of describes what the owners thought. This is the research project was called this, and so this is the one that was led. It's Transmission Pool Fund research led by Michigan Tech, and that's the name of it. So you can certainly Google that and actually find the copy of that. Again, it's been out for half a dozen years already, so it's a pretty old document. It's just taken a while to implement it. And so we're proposing on adding 8 NBEs and 6 BMEs. And so that's the proposal in this ballot item. Not all of the elements that were part of this research study are being added as part of the survey process. Some of the states, including Minnesota, had issues with two of the elements in particular, one of which was a steel, primary steel diaphragm, and the other one was a primary concrete diaphragm. And so the thought would be is that any curved or skewed steel or concrete bridge may have to have this new element be added. And so we felt that this was a little onerous to states and not as beneficial. And so we removed those elements and did not include them as part of the ballot items, because there's multiple states, including Minnesota, that said that we wouldn't vote for the ballot if it include those elements, because it would take so many resources to capture that on every one of those skewed and curved bridges, that the value of adding that isn't necessarily worth the benefit. And so we didn't want to add the onerous to states and require something that states may have issue meeting. And so we felt that those are the two elements as part of the research study that we removed from the proposed ballot item. Let's see, and here's the list of the final NBEs and the BMEs, so that these list all of them that we're proposing as part of this ballot item. I think this is about all I wanted to describe here. But certainly you can read this to give you some background and understanding. This is a similar process to what we did with the recent joints that were added. So there's a lot of deck joint elements that were added last year that were just recently put into the MBEI, and so this is the same process that we're using for that as far as the survey and getting responses. But so there's some of the information. The other thing that I want to go over is, let's see here, apologize for this, is a little bit of background on NBEs and BMEs. And so here's this 8th ballot item that we have out of my committee, is to update the table in the MBEI that describes NBEs and describes the BMEs and which ones are reportable and which ones are not reportable. And so as you can see here, this is a new table that we're adding, and anything that's underlined is things that we're adding. So like the steel primary cable, those new NBEs that we're adding are all going to be reportable. So all NBEs are reportable. And so again, we worked with Federal Highway and they said they can accept them, but they weren't going to require them. But a lot of the states that had these big types of bridges actually wanted them reportable, because that way they wouldn't have to convert them into existing NBE elements, and it's better just to report them as they inspect them. And so for clarification, like I said, all of the NBEs are reportable, and Federal Highway will audit states on the quality of all of the reportable elements. So anything on here that we add or that was on existing will be reportable and also auditable by Federal Highway. And so there's some other second page of the table. I had to spill over to the next table. But another clarifying point here, let's see, is the BMEs. So this gets a little more confusing in that some BMEs are reportable and some are not reportable. So for instance, all the joints that were originally part of the MBEI are reportable, and then the steel protective coatings were also reportable, and then the bearings. Oops, sorry. So I don't know if the bearings is on the next page, but let's see. Yeah, the bearings are another element that a BME element that's reportable. But anyways, but the new elements joint elements that we added last year are not reportable. So you notice that we had to use 301A. And so what states would do is they would, if they wanted to, would separate their 301s from the 301As. And then for their purposes, they would collect information on 301A, because we provided a good and clear picture of what a 301A looks like and what a 301 looks like. But then there is a reporting 301 data. It kind of has a parent-child relationship where a 301A would roll up into a 301 data. And so as you're reporting data to the Federal Highway, you would report your 301 and 301A all in the 301 information or data. But also note that one of the questions that Federal Highway asked and that we wanted to is we purposely didn't make any of these new bridge elements. So the new bridge elements over here on the right-hand side, those are all the newer bridge elements, the miscellaneous ones that we're adding. And in addition to this, let's see, I think I remember. Yeah, all of these ones are the ones that we're adding. And so none of those are reportable. So use them at your discretion, use them, change the condition state language as you wish. But as far as my understanding, and I've talked to Federal Highway about this already, is that if an element is non-reportable, then regardless of whether you have that element in the field or not, if Federal Highway audits you on your program and you're missing that element, it's more for informational purposes for the states that want to do it, and you wouldn't held to compliance if you are missing that BMA element that wasn't reportable. So for instance, if you didn't like the deck drainage system element that we're adding and you're like, I don't want to collect it and we don't add ADEs and I don't want to do it, then just don't do it, basically. But for states, they're like, you know, it really adds benefit and it adds value because maybe in our deterioration modeling, element level deterioration modeling, that's a good element to add. And so we really want to understand what that means to the long-term deterioration profile of our bridges. And so we want to know what that is. Then maybe you want to add that element, or maybe you need that element for bridge maintenance purposes, like, you know, maybe to make sure that those deck drainage systems don't get clogged or something like that. That's what MnDOT uses it for. And so we want to maintain that element because that tracks our maintenance for it. So whenever those deck drainage systems reach a certain condition state, that triggers different maintenance action items. And so whether they go out and vac it or whether they go out and, you know, unclog it or whatever they do, it requires a different level of urgency depending on what condition state that is, just as an example. And so we have been using this for a long time. So I don't know if that, I apologize if I'm not making sense here, or I'm a little convoluted in this presentation, just dealing with all this bridge vessel impact issue media questions this morning, and haven't really had a chance to put this all together in a very concise, easy to understand method. But does anybody have any questions on either the elements that we're adding, the big bridge elements, or these reportable, non-reportable things, or any of the other things that are in the ballot items that we're proposing for the changes to the MBEI? Okay, I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything. Nancy, did I catch everything that I presented at the Midwest Bridge Program Manager meeting? Is there some things that I presented that I? Okay.
No, I think you covered it. Obviously we appreciate you being here even under the circumstances, and certainly understand that this is kind of a crazy day for many people. So I know that one of the things that you had asked at the Midwest meeting is if there was feedback based on what you have presented here about any of the elements. And so maybe you did such a good job and everyone understands it and agrees 100%. So, you know, I guess if there's anyone that does have any questions, Ed is certainly willing to answer questions, or but go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to ask Ed if he wouldn't mind sending what he was showing us just now.
Oh, sure. I can send you that. Nancy, I think you have it already, but I can send you an email with the 2 ballot items for the MBEI. Would you like all of the safety and evaluation proposed ballot items? 4 of them are for the MBE, changes to the MBE. I can certainly go over those if you want me to. And then 2 of them are to adopt an NCHR research project into an AASHTO guidance document. One for the inspection and evaluation of main span cables, and the second one is developing an inspection program for drones. And so those are two AASHTO proposed ballot items that would become AASHTO guidance documents. So those are our 8 total, 2 for the MBEI, 4 for the MBE, and 2 for AASHTO guidance documents. I can send you all 8 if you'd like.
Well, my vote is yes. I would love to see all those.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, I can send you those, Mark. I do know that Bernie has those as well. So Bernie
okay.
from Texas had
Yep.
all of those. So Bernie's actually on our committee.
Yep.
So he should have all of those as well. So this
Okay.
is a heads up. And then Andy is actually on our committee as well too. I see. And then
Yeah.
Mark Bucci from Louisiana is also on our committee.
I really appreciate you sharing this, because sometimes we don't realize it, even though we have people that from the different states that are on the committees, and they don't really, it's not even intentional. It's just that it doesn't always get thought about to share. And I think really appreciate you sharing it with this group that is actually using it. Robbie, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was about to mention the same thing, Nancy. You got it. I know like a lot of us are in the committee, but at the same time, we may not get looped in. Also, I mean, I'm thinking Don probably is in the committee also, but once in a while we may miss these, but it's always a good idea to, if you don't mind, Ed, like just go ahead and please share these.
Yep.
Yeah, and we do have a couple of cable stay bridges, and I wanted to explore what are the new element that you guys are capturing. I can see those dampener, I can see those cable wrap.
Yeah, what I would suggest is if you could look at the agenda item and if you pull up the research project, and I have the research project, but it's probably just better just to Google it.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have pictures of all these elements. So a lot of times it's like, I only have one suspension bridge in Minnesota. It's a local agency bridge. And so MnDOT doesn't even own any. And so just even understanding what it is and what it looks like and what you're describing was confusing and was a little bit of a learning curve for me. So that research project really provides a lot of guidance on not only the condition state kind of language, but also exactly what the heck you're looking at, like what is that or where is that, what types of bridge. So that was super helpful for me anyway. So
and we surely are dealing, Georgia here. We're getting questions from our upper management regarding the Baltimore bridge head, saying, do we have a bridge similar to that? Can that happen in Georgia? And then we're putting our explanation saying no, like one of the those 2 cable stay bridges, they are close to the port, and then we are working to provide justification or our response saying, what, we don't think like it's going to happen or something like that. So it's every state, I guess, like we're all like scrambling trying to provide answers for media.
yep, no, I've literally gotten 50 calls today or 50 emails and dozen calls today. So yeah, it's been very much, and started at 5:30 this morning. So it's just been crazy this morning.
Yep, I saw at 3:30 and I moved from Maryland, so I have been reaching out to those folks. Like, I know them personally. So. Yep.
In the early 2000s, we actually lost a bridge during a storm. A tug was pushing some rather large barges, high currents, high winds. The captain was asleep and the second mate was piloting and took out a bent on a bridge going to one of our islands. And we lost a few folks. It was at night. It was terrible.
Yeah, so I'm showing some pictures that kind of showing these different elements and what they look like. My hope would be is that there's not that many bridges with these elements on there, and this will actually help quantify and describe the existing condition enough that the benefits outweigh the costs of actually collecting and getting the quantities and condition states for the data. So that's what we're seeing. but again, yeah, it's really confusing as to what these elements are and where they are. Like here's an example of that post-tensioning where it's kind of an externally applied post-tensioning applied to a cap. But,
Yep.
but like I said, we took out the diaphragm things. But sorry, go ahead. Question?
No. I think that I remember when I was in Maryland too, like they did the post-tensioning because we saw a bunch of cracks on our cap, you know. And
Yep.
I think we have done few here in Georgia too. So.
Yep. I have one under construction right now, actually. So.
Okay.
Those were heavily cantilevered like that, Rami?
No, sir. No.
Oh, okay.
We had in Minnesota, we had a pier cap that it was deteriorating because of the deck joint above, and we had a really poor detailing where it didn't have a lot of development of the bars and all like a lot of the stirrups. It wasn't double nested stirrups. A lot of the stirrups were deteriorated, and so we just, if you ran the equations, even with the reduced load factor for dead load of 1.15 and no impact, we're getting negative load ratings. And so the current strut and tie modeling and finite element modeling analysis couldn't come up and couldn't capture, you know, the issues, right? And so we had to come up with this. And so we used a different program. It's a long story, but yeah. So anyways, so here's the other AASHTO agenda items. So this is let's see, I can open up this one right here. This has to do with pre-stressed concrete beams and load rating them for service and for inventory, using we're giving more description about what equations you have to use for pre-stressed concrete beams and load rating. That's providing some more clarifications on that. This one I think is to do for load posting, and if you use LRFR, you have to reiterate because some of the loads are a function of the truck weight. Gusset plates, we're still doing that. We'll make some minor revisions for that, but our next phase for gusset plates, we'll actually be doing some examples with some section loss. And I think this one this LD one has to do with steel compact beams, and so there's some errors in the equations in the code in MBE, and so we're changing the formulas and to make them consistent with VRR and what that does. And like I said, the last two had to do with these AASHTO guidance documents from the NCHRP research project, one on drones and one on the inspection evaluation of main cables. So, unless you guys have further questions for me, I don't really have anything else to present other than I will send out to you all 8 agenda items. Feel free to work with your liaison on the committee to really understand those. I always like making sure we get good comments and not comments that aren't super helpful. Some of the comments are like, we don't want you to add these defects because we don't do defects. It's like, well, that you're not required to do defects, right? So that's not a helpful comment because you don't do defect. You don't have to do a defect, right? And so some of these non-reportable things is like, use it at your own discretion, use it if you want to, but you're not required to, right? And so that's some of those things, some of those comments you get back aren't super helpful, right? And so, but hopefully we'll get minimal comments. We've been working on this for 2 years now, I guess, 2.5 years. So.
Well, Ed, thanks. This is great. A lot of good information in there.
Yep. The one last comment I'd have for you is if you do have a question or a comment or a suggestion or like something in the MBEI or something in the MBE like doesn't work or is an error, or really be good to get research to really understand, you know, why that's like that or should we be changing that, I'm one of your contacts in addition to anyone else that's on the committee. And so if there's something that comes up that you want to improve, we can't just change the code and say, well, you want to do this for whatever reason because you don't think it's right. You know, obviously sometimes you need a little bit of research and calibration of something to really make those changes. And so, yeah, we're working on a lot of different things. Currently, we're trying to rewrite the entire MBE. So that's kind of in our wheelhouse. Hopefully, we'll have that done in 3 to 4 years. So, but again, if there's anything that I can do, that's part of my job as a committee chair is to kind of work with the states and making sure that the information that AASHTO is providing is helpful and is something that the states all support. So that's part of my job. So if there's anything that comes up, just reach out to me.
Hey, Ed, this is Ed Armbruster with West Virginia. I've got a question. Have any of the other states asked about the joint that is there? And are they moving the joint with a integral or semi-integral abutment to the backside of the approach slab? And that being, I mean, I know federal highways, they've said that they don't, that's not a bridge joint, but I mean, it's one of those things that it's functioning as the joint for the bridge. Is that something that other states are worried about? Or is it something that we should be worrying about?
Great question. I don't know if you can find a consensus answer to that. We specifically, when we added those new joint elements last year, we specifically spelled out that none of those joints are applicable to that pavement to approach panel joint. So you don't have to include that quantity and that condition state language and report that information as part of that joint. I do know for Minnesota DOT that we have an ADE for that joint or that element. We call it an E8 joint. And so for integral and semi-integral bridges and even parapet bridges, we have a joint between the approach panel and the approaching pavement. And so we monitor and track that joint and performance, and we've just recently come up with new standards for that detailing of that new joint. There was recently an NCHRP scan tour about that joint in particular and the approach panels. And so I think that ended about 2 years ago. So there is a report that you can review that gives best practices and information about how states, what states detail and what states do for their approach panels and that pavement joint. So you can look at that scan tour final report. Okay. Minnesota tracks it because a lot of times that preservation or maintenance work of that joint is done by our bridge maintenance crews. And so we actually have that as an element. And so we actually record the condition of that and then replace that joint as needed. And so we track that element condition over time. It tends to last, depending on your quality of installation, between 5 and 10 years, which is about roughly half or a third of the time of a strip seal joint performance or service life. And so we actually have to replace them with different types of material over that time. And so MnDOT has found a benefit of tracking and quantifying and knowing that information of that joint, but it's not required by federal highway. And I would think that some states do it and some states don't. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're heading that direction, because the other big thing is that the public calls in and says the joint at this bridge is bad, and you go out and look, there is no joint. So if you go looking at the data, you need to know what they're talking about, because the traveling public doesn't know that that's not a bridge joint.
That's not a bridge joint. Yep. Yeah. The other thing that some of our older detailing had it's called a compressible joint. So it's kind of a foamish type of material. And so what happens is if you don't have really good drainage, and we've actually added a drain pipe in that joint, a drainage element or drain pipe buried underneath there, is that it actually, when it gets water soaked in that joint and doesn't drain out, those compression joints will actually float up. And traffic will call and say, hey, you got this joint that's sticking up, and they don't realize that it's just foam, and they think maybe it's steel or something. And then so accidents have been caused by these things that have been sticking out of this joint, maybe 2, 3, 4 inches, because it's floated up.
Okay. I may reach out to you.
Yeah, we have some new standards we're developing and new approach or approved products for joints based on our internal survey of how they've performed, and come up with an approved product list and approved product list installation instructions for the contractors to install them to make sure they get the longest lasting performance.
All right. Thanks for the information. Appreciate it.
And just so you know, Tracy is on my committee. So
yeah,
your boss.
I'm working real close with Tracy, but I just wanted to, yeah, that's a good one to find out from other people of what they're doing with those joints.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, Nancy, I'm just going to send you the 8 agenda items, ballot items, and then you can distribute it to whomever's on your list, and then go from there, right? So I'm willing to talk at the Northeast and the West if they're available, but hopefully it'll be a less busy time. I'll be a little more prepared.
I understand. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Okay.
And thanks, Mark, for taking the lead here in Stephanie's absence.
Yeah, no worries.
All right.
Thanks.
I will distribute those. Thank you so much, Ed, and I will stop recording.